Well, we used to actually, I don't know if it's an official name, call it a grunt maneuver.
Right, a
What
grunt
you
maneuver.
do, what you do is you take your chest and your stomach and you just tighten it up to keep the
He's
blood,
better at it than I am.
you know? I did
Yeah.
it all the time.
Welcome everyone to a bonus episode of the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. I say bonus episode because this episode is going to be a little different than our regular programming. With me today are two Air Force veterans, and we're going to break down some videos of planes flying into what's called the Star Wars Canyon out in the Death Valley. These are some incredible videos that you may have seen on YouTube, but these guys, they know what's going on in the aircraft, and we're going to have some views from the cockpit. First up, I'm going to have Larry Googins introduce himself. Larry, thank you so much for joining us for the Scuttlebutt today. I'm going to bring up a picture of you in your service. If you could let us know a bit about yourself.
Okay, well, the picture better be good. Sean, thank you very much for having us on. Yeah, my name is Larry Googins. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I flew in the backseat of an F-4 as a weapons systems officer in 1970, went to pilot training, and then went back into the F-4 E model again as a pilot. I continued on to fly O2s for after F-4s up in Alaska. I flew A-10s for 5 years as an instructor and a operations officer over in Korea, and then continued, finished my 21 years in the Air Force flying AT-38 at Holman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pictures you see, the one up in the upper left is an F-4E model. It has a gun underneath the nose, as you can see. The wings that are in the middle are actually navigator wings, which is what I first got. The picture in the middle again is an aircraft from the squadron that I flew, 34th TAC Fighter Squadron at Karat. The little picture to the right with the two in there was our squadron commander and myself. Again, I was a backseater and I flew with him. Vietnam Veterans of America logo, of course, but the picture on the lower left-hand side, that's
The handsome guy.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but yeah, that was when I was 25 years old. Yeah, 25 years old, the two pictures there, both of them. And then look what happened. So that's basically my my career. Most of the time in fighter or fighter type aircraft, except a forward air control aircraft up in Alaska called an O2, which if you're civilian world is a Cessna 337. And that's what I did. We're going to talk about low level flying, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a lot of low level flying in all of those aircraft. I was out in the restricted areas in Nevada in all four of the aircraft that I flew at different times for different exercises, red flag being primarily one of them. Mm-hmm. So I've flown low level in all those aircraft. And after Ben introduces himself, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about low level flying itself. Is that correct?
Definitely. We're going to watch some videos, and I'm going to hear your expertise on low-level flying. But yes, Ben, if you'd like to introduce yourself, you're actually rejoining us from season 1. So welcome back to the Scuttlebutt. And I'll share some nice, young, handsome photos of you as well.
Oh, yes, there we are. The one in the middle was called a tiger picture. That was taken while I was a student pilot in T-38s. Like Larry, I was 23, may have turned 24 when that photo was taken. The one on the upper left is second vocation, and the lower left, with the one where I have the flag in my hand, was actually at my retirement ceremony from the Air Force. And the one in the upper right was getting some sort of medal and doing that. And then you got a picture of ribbons. I was active duty Air Force for 22 years, about the same time frame as Larry, from Vietnam through Desert Storm. I went on active duty in '69 and retired in 1991. My flying was predominantly, most of my flying time was a C-130, which is a 4-engine turboprop tactical airlifter, but also had 2 tours in Air Training Command flying as an instructor in the T-37, which is a Cessna primary trainer, and also the T-38, which is an advanced trainer in the Air Force. It's now used in the fighter training track. But I too have a lot of experience flying low levels in all three aircraft.
Some exciting stuff.
Sure.
Well, again, thank you both for joining me for the Scuttlebutt episode. And a reminder to our audience that if you are listening to this on audio, jump over to our YouTube channel, because this will be where you're going to get the most experience out of this video, because we will be watching some low-level flying and hearing both Ben and Larry's responses to that. We're going to get straight to that here. And I'm going to first bring up a little clip from a trailer that's out right now. It's from something called Top Gun, which a lot of people may have heard of. It's only a tiny little clip here, but this is a camera that's been affixed to the bottom of a fighter jet flying through a canyon. This goes pretty quick as it's a fast clip, but I figured this would give us maybe a bit of an idea of how fast these planes are flying through the canyon. So without further ado. Okay, that pumped my adrenaline instantly. My hair is on edge and I want to go do that. But that's the obvious Hollywood version of low-level flying. Is it that exciting?
That is a Hollywood version, true. It is that exciting, but it's not as difficult as it looks like on that video. As long as you keep ahead of things. The idea in flying high speed, low level is to think as far in front of the aircraft as you can. Not what it's doing now, but where you're going and what it needs to do to in this case, low level, to get around where you need to do. So you need to be looking in the future. I think Ben can attest to this also. Flying fast and flying low, you have to be looking a bit ahead of what's going on, a lot ahead of what's going on. And I'm not talking about distance, I'm talking about time. Distance is not it, but it's time. So that video did show that you better have done that, but that's really what I got out of that video.
So that includes some deep knowledge of maybe the terrain that you are flying into.
Yes, it can, but sometimes you're gonna, if you're flying in a war area, you could be flying down a canyon or a low-level area that you really don't know all the time what's coming up next. So what you always have to have is a way out. Know how to get out of the situation. If you come up down a low-level canyon, low-level area, and there's a big wall in front of you, you have to be able to climb over that. If your aircraft can't do that, you're too low. So that's what I'm talking about, seeing your way ahead. If you can't turn the corner and you have to go up, you have to make sure your aircraft has a capability to go over it.
Ben, same question. The idea of flying that low, that fast, it seems exciting. How technically difficult is that?
Well, it is, but as Larry pointed out, the key is stay ahead of the aircraft. Because if you get behind the aircraft, you're in deep, serious trouble. And as Larry said, you always have to have an out. And we talked a lot about flying, about situational awareness, because you always had to be aware of what your altitude was, what your airspeed was, what your terrain was, what the weather was, and all those sorts of things. And it also depended on the configuration of the aircraft and what you were carrying, because at different weights and configurations, the aircraft's handling characteristics can be quite a bit different. So you always had to know situational awareness of all the factors, of which there are many, and planning ahead, knowing where you are.
And it's not always that someone is with you to let you know that. Like, you might not always have a co-pilot. It might just be you with that knowledge, correct?
Well, it's very, different situation for Larry, because, flying, the A-10, which is a single place aircraft, where in the 130s, we always had air crews. And, the air crew was key and it's all working together to make sure what we were doing was safe.
What I want to get to now is that Star Wars canyon, what's been dubbed. The next video I'm going to show is sort of a panoramic view of this canyon. I'm assuming that both of you are aware of where this canyon is at. A lot of people show up at this canyon, civilians, just to get shots of the fighter jets coming down into the canyon. But what made us want to do this video today was that we're going to get to a C-130 and a C-17 flying this canyon, which is a lot different than the fighter jets. So first up is going to be this video called Death Valley Days. You can find this on YouTube. This is a panoramic view of the Star Wars canyon.
321, I'd like to proceed low level this time for approximately 10 Mike. We are Victor Mike Charlie.
Now, some technical stuff being said there, a part of this gentleman's video. Can you guys tell me what that jargon was?
Well, Victor Mike Charlie means visual meteorological conditions. In other words, you're not in the weather, you have clear vision of what's there.
Sounds like he was descending from a clearance from like air traffic control to then flying on his own, looking out the front window, looking out the window. And that's like Ben said, it's VMC is the conditions. In other words, it was clear.
Okay, and you need clear weather to get down into this canyon, is that correct?
Yeah, it looks like the weather is anyway there, but
right.
He said it, yeah.
I'm going to play it one more time just so we can sort of see that.
Proceed low level this time for approximately 10 Mike. We are Victor Mike Charlie.
Now, what's interesting is that as we get to the next couple videos, we're pretty high up on the canyon here, and the planes are going to be going down into this canyon. They're not going to be zipping across just to take a look at it. They're flying in, banking, and taking the turns. So the next video I'm going to show you is actually an A-10 that is built for this type of flying, low level. Larry, you could probably give us some more information on that. So here we go. We have.
So what I was talking about is the straight wing type aircraft and the way they're designed, that they create a lot of lift. That's the other reason why the airplane doesn't fly real fast. Max speed is about 400 knots, and that's kind of going down, generally more in the 350 knot or 400 mile an hour area. But because of the high lift wing, it can turn tight. And so it can fly lower and it can fly down ridge lines like this to avoid radar. And the radar can't see through the mountain, so you're basically hiding from any ground-based radar.
How fast do you think the A-10 is going here?
350, 375.
Okay.
Knots. So add miles per hour to that. I can't do it. Ben's better at this than me. 400 miles an hour.
Yeah, and that's indicated, not ground speed.
It's
what does
both.
that mean? Indicated versus ground speed?
That altitude is both, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
What is the difference there, indicated versus ground speed?
Well, indicated is what you read on your airspeed indicator. But depending on what altitude you are and what the temperature is, what your true airspeed and then the wind does to it, then computes to a ground speed. So your indicated airspeed will normally be much lower than your ground speed.
I'll give it a simple. I'm a simpler guy. When you're down flying right on the, I'll say right on the deck, right at low, your indicated airspeed is about the same as your speed across the ground.
Right.
When you get up high at higher altitude, the wind is the air is thinner.
Okay.
So the air going over the wing of the aircraft is lower. So you could be flying at 20,000 feet with an indicated airspeed of 300 knots, but your speed across the ground, because that's the air going, could be 400 knots. So indicated airspeed, because of the thinner air, ground speed, of course, everybody knows what ground speed is. It's your speedometer.
Right. As we're seeing here, these A-10s are flying pretty low. How low do you think they are getting? Like what feet?
It depends. I think the restriction in that area was 200 feet above the ground,
Mhm.
called AGL, above the ground, ground level. But but as you come close to the sides of the mountain, you probably are a little bit lower than that. But that's the restriction was supposed to be 200 feet above the ground level.
Okay.
And that's probably above the base of the canyon. So it varies. It varies, as you can see. It could be anywhere from 200 feet to 400 feet. Depends on the ground.
And is there indicators inside the cockpit that are screaming at you to pull up to...
Yeah. It's your head. It's right. Your eyes.
Everything's
Yeah,
telling
your
you get higher into the air.
No. Not in an A-10.
No.
Nope. It's all looking out the front window.
So
Yeah.
Larry, we talked a bit before we started recording about you saying like you've flown into these areas, into Death Valley. Both of you done low level flying. How is this part of the training? Is this something that you're doing in flight school? Is this something that you're continuously doing as you learn new aircraft? Is it something that, you have to pass this to get a certain medal, or,
No,
first...
you don't get any medals for it. If it did, I'd have more than anyway. It's to avoid ground-based radar.
Okay.
And in some cases, even airborne radar. Then when I was flying, now things are a little bit different. They can pick them up better. Anyway, it's to avoid it. So if you're flying through, let's say, just level terrain, you can fly down to about 100 feet, and anybody, the ground would still kind of wash out your aircraft, even if it was level.
Mhm.
So you usually come up against a mountain of some sort and have to fly through the mountain area or the lowest part, which would be a canyon.
Mhm.
So you can get down low enough that you can't be seen. I also flew as an aggressor out at Red Flag. Aggressor meaning the enemy aircraft.
Mhm.
And if you're flying up higher, looking for someone flying at low level, it was very, very, even a C-130, it was very difficult to see that aircraft. Guess what you could see first? The shadow. Because the shadow was a black spot across a light ground.
Mhm.
So
And
what
then
you
from
also
there...
wanted to avoid was your shadow.
Mhm.
Because if someone's up higher looking for you and they can't see your aircraft because, well, several things, you didn't want that black shadow flying beside you.
Mhm.
Because you could go, oh, there you are. So there were a lot of different things. Now, back to your original question, no, you didn't get a medal for it. It was mission oriented, depending on the mission that you had.
Mhm.
I'll just say real quick, and I'll pass on to Ben. If you're a fighter squadron that primarily is for air-to-air combat, dogfights like they talked about in World War II, then you would still train to be able to do low-level flying, but your primary training would be air-to-air, dogfight type thing. If you were a airplane that dropped aircraft that dropped bombs, more like an A-10, you'd be more likely, in fact, almost all the time, to fly low level to the target and back. And I think Ben can address that in C-130s also, because that's why they did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, pilot training, it was about learning how to fly low levels and read maps, terrain charts, and what you look at the chart and you look out there and you can identify where you are and read map to ground and the basic things you do with visual navigation. And at 130, it was the same thing. We flew low levels to avoid detection. We'd fly for training. We would do 500 feet above the ground modified contour. Of course, obviously in combat missions, you could fly 100, 200 feet.
Give me a visual of 100 feet. How many stories is that?
Well, stories about 12, 14 feet.
So you're saying about a 9-story building, roughly?
For 100 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever. Well, not suffice to say, if you're getting shot at, you can fly as low as you
Sure,
can.
Mhm.
sure,
Yeah, we're talking restrictions for training.
And some trees are 100 feet.
sure.
Okay.
Well, and the other, your maneuverability would be more limited if you're flying formation. And in the 130s, typically, if you were dropping a lot of stuff, like maybe the lead element of 3 aircraft be dropping heavy equipment, and the second element right behind them with 3 aircraft be dropping paratroopers, you're flying in formation. And so you have to lead time and everything so your wingman can keep up with you.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned the C-130. That's the next video I want to show, is that we watched the A-10, which is built for this. Now there's a video of a C-130 taking on this canyon.
Can I mention one thing before?
Sure.
You'll get it in a second.
Yeah.
You fly low level in terrain mask to get towards the target. But since you can't see the ground very far in front of you, of course, as you can see on the video,
Mhm.
in order to attack a target, you'd have to climb up and get a little higher so you can see your target.
Mhm.
So the general, and this is A-10s, F-4s, we did the same thing. You fly low level, and then as you're approaching the target, you'd pull up and climb, and then pick up the target. And then if you were dive bombing, you'd roll in, drop your bombs on the target, pull off, and then go back down to low level. So what I'm getting at is the fact that you can't, as you can see in these videos, you can't see very far in front of you.
Mhm.
And you can't see, if there's a target on the other side of those mountains, you're not going to pick it up until you climb above them. Anyway.
Now, when you say like seeing your target, so you can't, imagining this, you can't fly level to see the target, depending on even about how high you are. You're going to have to tilt down enough just to see where you're headed.
No, it's just you could fly over target level and drop ordnance,
Mhm.
but it was more effective to hit a target if you can point at it flying downhill. But you could. In the A-10, we did what they called I don't want to get into a bump up.
Mhm.
In other words, you do fly level, and it has a big gun, as you know, a 30mm gun with 1,000 rounds.
Yep.
So what you would do is you would fly straight to the target, and would do what they called a bump up, and you'd pull up, and then just nose over, 0G and nose over, and then straight for target. So the
0G, that's that feeling you get on a roller coaster when you're up and over the.
Exactly what it is. Yeah.
And the A-10, that gun, that's the burp that everybody hears. Burp. That's
yeah. And it's got a B at the end. Burp.
Oh, okay. I'll make sure.
Well, and we would do the same thing, because you come up to a drop zone that you're going to drop on. Normally, we drop either equipment or personnel at 1,000 feet above the ground.
Mhm.
And for them, you had a certain amount of green light time that they could get out. That was figured out, and you were straight and level about 1,000 feet above the ground during the whole time that you were doing the airdrop, which meant you were pretty vulnerable at that particular point in time.
I want to come back to that idea of dropping either ordnance or equipment or people, because my understanding is, the Air Force is flying the plane, and I'm guessing that there's another branch that's inside the plane that you are dropping.
That's correct.
Okay, we're going to come back to that, but let's get to the C-130 here.
Structure at this time for about 10 miles.
The clicking that you are hearing is probably the person recording the video, shooting pictures. Now, this guy, he didn't seem to fly too low. We saw the A-10 go down into the canyon, taking those hard banks. And this looked a little bit more like he was flying over the canyon.
Well, the 130, I'll let you finish watching the video.
Oh, we can pause. Go ahead.
Well, the 130 is similar to the A-10, and it's a positive camber wing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you note, it also has straight wings.
Mm-hmm.
And it flies at a lower airspeed, probably around 180 indicated airspeed, 180 knots, which meant that you had a shorter turn radius with it. And the 130, it's kind of like you can turn it on a dime. as opposed to an aircraft moving at a much higher airspeed. So it's a very maneuverable aircraft. It is a tactical aircraft, but it's made to work short fields and do airdrops and do all the things that it does. So it's a very maneuverable aircraft, and it does have a short turn radius because of those same flight factors that Larry was talking about.
I think one difference might be, Ben, help me if I'm wrong, with an airplane like the A-10, you know, with a stick in the middle between your legs, when you move that stick over, that wing went right up.
Right.
I'm going to guess with something like the C-130, because it was bigger and heavier, it took a little longer to roll.
Right. Yeah,
So
with the wingspan, it took longer to roll.
Yeah, so you had to plan it a little earlier.
You had to lead the turn.
Yeah,
That's true. And plus, we had a bank limit that you didn't have in the A-10, because you could fly upside down the A-10, and we were pretty well limited in most cases to 45 degrees of bank. I mean, you could go 60, but we were pretty well limited to 45 degrees of bank. So you had to keep all of that in mind as well.
There was one thing, again, if we're taking it too long, people ask a lot of times from Ben and I, what's it feel like to pull G's?
Yeah.
All right. You know, we're sitting here at 1G, 1 gravity. So you watch that A-10, for example, which I'm familiar with, and the C-130. When you roll that airplane up to 90 degrees of bank, you don't have any lift, because the lift is this way. So naturally, the airplane would probably fall down. Well, it doesn't, of course, because you do it quickly. But to do that, you actually have to take that, again, the stick in the airplane and pull back on that thing to turn that corner. At that time, your G load on the aircraft would be 3 or 4, possibly one would be up to 5, but 3, 4, 5 G's. That's G forces because of the way your body sits in the aircraft. The reason I'm mentioning that is G's don't have anything to do with altitude. People think, well, what's it like if you're going straight up? What are the G's like? Well, it can be nothing. It can be 1 G. But flying these canyons and turning and doing it in the C-130 is the same way. You are, they're called pulling a lot of G's. You weight on the aircraft, and they go in different directions. The C-130, if you're in a 60, you're at 1 G right now, 1 gravity. Okay, at 60 degrees of bank to hold level flight, you have to pull 2 G's. And from there, from 60 to 90 degrees, it's, Ben, help me, it goes from 2 G's up to infinity.
Yeah, well, we normally, limited 45 degrees bank. So, we rarely, was it, 1.5 G's was about it. Because and rolling, asymmetrical G's, if you were actually rolling instead of in a steady bank level, was a low limit. So we actually didn't push the G limits on the aircraft. But when you got people and equipment on board, you have to keep all that in mind too.
And at what G's do they say that you could potentially pass out?
It varies. It varies. In a fighter and in a T-38, you wear a pair of pants that are called a G suit, which as you start pulling G's, it squeezes your legs to keep the blood. The problem is the blood going from your brain down to your toes, and your toes don't think very much. But anyway, so it drains out of your brain. So it varies, but I'll say a number. You get above 7 G's, you're going to start losing your vision. It's going to start coming in on the sides.
That's different than when you stand up too quick and you start losing your vision. But in the same way, the blood's rushing from your head.
Coming out, yeah, same kind of idea. Yeah, a 7 G's would probably be a maximum limit. Anything above 5 G's, you start feeling it. I think that's what I recall. You get up to 6 or 7 G's, you don't want to stay there too long.
Yeah.
No.
Major Mitch Fossum, who was on an episode earlier, he's the F-15E pilot, mentioned that whenever you come out of that passed out state, there's something like the face that you make, that he was talking about, that if you pass out pulling G's, they like seeing the guy's face as he woke up from that.
Yeah.
Was there a name for that?
Now that, I don't know. That was in the centrifuge where you spun around in a chair.
Okay.
Yeah, that's called a Barony chair. That's having you experience vertigo, true vertigo. But But the G's, you know, Larry and I both flew the T-38 was a 5G pull over the top, and you learned how to stay ahead of pulling the G's. Like I said, it affects the vision first because the blood pressure has to overcome the ocular pressure in your eyes. That's why you'll start to gray out. It's the first thing that indicates maybe you need to let off of the pole a little bit.
And is there a technique? I've heard this technique where you just sort of like clench your groin, you know, pucker up, I guess, and like that helps to hold the blood higher up in your body beyond the G suit.
Yeah, you would tense your legs, and of course the G suit that Larry was talking about would help you maintain that. But that was just your abdomen and your legs, your lower extremities. But you could, you know, besides tensing those muscles, you'd do a guttural air thing too, to kind of help you maintain it as well.
What does that sound like?
Well, we used to actually, I don't know if it's an official name, call it a grunt maneuver.
Right.
What you do is you take your chest and your stomach and you just tighten it up to keep the blood.
He's better at than I am.
You know, I did it all the time. And you wanted to do that, but you know, you just and then, but usually you don't sustain those G's. You're usually just doing it in turning. Yeah. And then you'd go from 1G to 5Gs to 1G, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you did it in between, especially if you're flying air to air, you're doing it all the time. So we just called it grunt maneuver. I think there's an official name, but you did anything you could to keep your vision, to keep it from losing the blood in your head.
Right.
All right, we're going to jump over to the C-17 video. This is a Boeing C-17 doing not so much of a low-level fly into the canyon. It seems this is more above.
Air 17, single C-17, it's Point Juliet, offset in west.
So he did not seem to want to go much lower than that. Can you tell me how much of a difference this is in the plane, in the aircraft, as opposed to the C-130?
Well, in that case, he just overflew the canyon. He didn't fly down in it.
And this is not is this also a flat wing?
It has a little bit of a swept wing. You know, it has a little bit of a positive camber, but not as much as an A-10 or a C-130. And you would also be flying at a higher airspeed than the 130
because of the engines.
Well, the nature of the airframe and the way it's designed to fly.
Okay.
Because it's a strategic airlifter. I mean, it's made to move people from long distances, point A to point B, and so it would have a higher cruise speed. And it worked at higher altitudes than the 130, which was basically medium altitudes and low level.
Now, the guys that brings me back to my question of the other branches that are within the aircraft that you are dropping into the drop zone. A lot of these guys, some of them I would guess, like the 101st Airborne, they've been jumping out of planes for a while, but are some of these guys not necessarily trained for what the Air Force is trained for, in the sense of feeling how the aircraft is moving, and they're ready for what that low level feels like in the cabin as opposed to the cockpit?
Well, we worked a lot with 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Pope Air Force Base is right in the middle of Fort Bragg. And we would load the troops up, and they had long drop zones to drop. You could drop full sticks of paratroopers on these long drop zones down at Fort Bragg. So we did a lot of training with them, and they had their training. The thing they didn't like about flying with us, it was always a training route for the crew and the navigator in particular for timing, because you had a time over the target or a time to be at the drop zone to drop them. And you also had warnings, in other words, that you had checklist items that had to be taken care of to prepare for the airdrop. So we would normally fly at least a 45 minute to a 1 hour route, and flying low level in the summertime with turbulence and bouncing around. Needless to say, paratroopers with their chutes and all their gear back in the very hot back end of a C-130, flopping around low level. Sometimes they get sick, and they didn't enjoy it. They'd rather get on a helicopter and go up and jump out and be done with it. So they really didn't like the fact that we took them on a little low level ride, because it's very different when you sit in the cockpit and you can see the horizon. You know, and if you're sitting sideways in the back of the aircraft and you can kind of see the train going by through the portholes, it's not the same. You know, it's very uncomfortable at low level for people in back end.
Ben, be honest. Did you ever purposely try to make them sick?
No.
You're a good
You
man.
know, you know, it's one of those things. But we kid about it in the Air Force. Why would you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? You know, but that's what they did for a living. And of course, there are static line jumps, most of them. Now there were high altitude, low opening drops that you could do too, which was a completely different arena. But most the people that we dropped were Army. We had some Air Force combat control teams that opened up drop zones and landing zones and those kinds of things that were jump qualified, and we would airdrop them as well.
Okay, now I want to get to this C-17 that actually goes into the canyon. First, you're going to see kind of a grainy video. This is somebody that was actually on the ground that took a video of it. You're going to see the C-17 coming in, but he certainly doesn't stay up high like the last one we saw.
What? Where'd that come from?
They were obviously kind of surprised that he came out of nowhere and went down into the canyon. But the interesting thing, this is the other video you sent me, Ben, is that we have the video from the cockpit of this C-17 flying in. And we're going to get to that now, because this is where I think you guys can really give us some idea of what the pilots are going through. There's obviously a couple other guys in the cockpit, what they are experiencing. Here we go. Terrain. Obviously, right off the start, we hear this seeing the computer screaming terrain at them. Is it also saying bank right?
Well, it you know, it had more advanced stuff than we did. We did have a radar altimeter, but it had great limitations. But they have terrain avoidance stuff built in, so it starts talking to you if they sense you're inside certain parameters.
All right, continue on here. This guy looks like he's holding on for dear life.
You're kind of bad.
You can see them banking. Now, this is what you were talking about. He seems up on the side here from what it looks like. How many Gs do you think they're pulling right here?
Oh, they're 1 G there.
Oh, okay.
I mean, their wings level.
Maybe a hair over that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of that.
Now that turn looked like you probably felt that one when he started to level this way, would you?
Yeah, well, you know, when you're under, 45 degrees of bank, which you normally are, you know, you're not pulling that hard on it. Not like what Larry would have been pulling in the A-10.
I also want to reverse here for a second and take a look at what is this green screen in front of the left pilot? And also another question, who is the pilot and who is the co-pilot? What is the positioning here?
Well, the guy in the left seat would be the pilot, and the guy in the right seat would be the co-pilot. Unless it really was a training mission, then you'd have the instructor in the right seat normally. Well, if you have an aircraft commander or a pilot that you're training, but you might be in the other seat as an instructor if you're training co-pilot. But basically the left seat's pilot, right seat's co-pilot. That's some kind of heads-up display.
It tells him
I flew
altitude,
around all
or...
airplanes. I didn't have that fancy stuff.
Something new. The new fancy stuff. Let me get the volume back up here. Bank right. So I believe they would have exited the canyon by that point. Now, was there a reason that these guys decided to go a lot lower than the first aircraft? And is that just another step in sort of the training process?
Well, they're actually flying through the canyon. Most time, in airlift aircraft, you wouldn't do that. You would use ridge lines and things for terrain masking. Anytime you're flying in a canyon like that, you don't have any margin for error.
Mm-hmm.
When you got one person in a one place aircraft is one thing, but when you have an air crew on board, you got several lives at risk there too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is more of a confidence thing. It can be done in the C-17 more than anything else, but I don't know that for a fact.
Exciting and terrifying.
I guess Ben and I probably both feel the same way. I don't see a purpose
Mm-hmm.
in that. You remember earlier I said you always need to have an out,
Mm-hmm.
have an escape of some sort. And I would challenge that if they didn't know this canyon, you've been driven down a windy road. If you're driving down a windy road and you've driven it many times, you know where the next wind is. But if you're driving down a windy road and you don't know where the next turn is, you'd slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But my only challenge with that is if they didn't know that canyon, which they probably did, and they came up against a hill in front of them, could that airplane climb out? I'm just going to guess, and Ben can pipe in. I don't think so. Now, with a fighter or an F4A10 that I flew, yes, you can. You could pull that thing up and go up to about 10,000 feet and just continue to climb. But I don't know. So I don't know what the tactical advantage would be for a C-17 to do it actually, unless it was some sort of training type thing, and that's why they filmed it.
Yeah, because this is very dangerous. I mean, there was a Navy pilot that was lost in this canyon. I believe it was last year, correct?
2019.
2019.
Yeah, an F-18.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, operationally, I think it was a confidence thing. Yeah, the aircraft will do it.
Yeah.
The C-17 would have had a good bit of airspeed, and also if you pushed all four engines up, you got a lot of thrust available too.
Yeah,
how fast do you think they were flying into that canyon in the C-17?
I don't know what airspeed they would be flying,
Mm-hmm.
at that altitude. It would have, the 130, we would have normally been probably around 180 knots indicated. They were probably in the 250 range,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm guessing. I don't know that for a fact.
This leads me to my last question. And this is something that Ryan and all and I have just talked about before. My usual co-host here on the Scuttlebutt is, do you ever buzz the tower? Have you buzzed the tower? And if you haven't, what's the punishment for buzzing the tower?
Who do you want to go first?
I want Larry to go first because I think Ben has a definite opinion on this.
Yeah, I'd rather Ben's opinion. No, I've never buzzed a tower. There's never a reason that I could think of I would want to do that for my own, staying in the military if you want.
Mm-hmm.
No, I've flown very low at low altitudes in airplanes that I've been by myself in, and done some of that. You've been able to sometimes fly down runways, at 100 feet, as fast as you could go in an airplane, as long as you don't go supersonic, and go the end of runway and climb up and go straight up. You can do those kinds of things with permission, but not by the tower.
Mhm.
That's putting someone else's life in danger. I know it did it on Top Gun, I guess twice, if I remember correctly. Is that right? And
Yeah.
I would never have done it because I wanted to stay in the Air Force and I didn't want to get court-martialed.
Mhm.
I was an operations officer. That's the second command of a A-10 squadron and all that. And if anybody had ever done that, they they would have been disciplined severely, and they wouldn't have been, and they probably wouldn't have been flying. But Ben was a commander, and it would probably come to him, and he would have to make a decision or get people to make a decision for him if someone did something like that. Ben, yeah.
Well, I, of course, never buzzed a tower either, but for somebody doing that, intentionally would be a disciplinary action. And, Larry knows what a flying evaluation board is, which it could result in that, and a person could actually lose their aeronautical rating. In other words, lose their wings, and they're no longer on flying status. So why would you want to risk that?
If someone had done it and you had to hand down the punishment, what would you have done?
Oh yeah, I would have, dealt with it severely, because you can't have that stuff. People die flying airplanes doing stupid things. So we don't do stupid things because it can be done safely.
Right.
But now on the other hand, as Larry said, I mean, I flew into uncontrolled airfields, on islands in the Pacific, and I actually some in Turkey, where it was completely uncontrolled airfield. And so you would fly in and you would fly down the runway to see what direction the windsock was, because you'd have somebody tell you what the winds were. And in some cases, you had to run the sheep and the cattle and the goats off of the runway. And then you could come back around and land. There was a little place we used to fly into in Yalova, Turkey, in northwest Turkey. And it didn't even have an instrument approach in its uncontrolled airfield. So if you went in there and there was weather, we would actually go across the Dardanelles and start flying instrument approach into Yeşilköy, which is the airport at Istanbul, until you broke out of the clouds underneath, and then you could cancel your instrument clearance and fly visually, turn around and fly visually back to the airfield and land. And then you could take off and you remain visual underneath the clouds until you could get an instrument clearance to fly into the clouds again.
How high are the clouds?
Pardon?
How high are the clouds usually, like average?
Well, it depends. Well, you would need, a 1,500-foot ceiling anyway to do that.
Wow, at 1,500-foot ceiling to do that, and we've been talking about flying at 100 feet.
Right.
Boy, this has been an incredible conversation. Again, if you are listening in, jump over to the YouTube channel to check out these videos and hear Ben and Larry's response to this. So thank you both for joining us to discuss this. Go ahead.
Can I just mention one thing? I don't know if we touched on that, and I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Flying low level down that canyon is not illegal. It's an authorized low level flying route. You can find it on maps. You can see it. It's a transition to a longer route, and I think it's called the Jedi transition. But so it's legal to do that, and flying low levels at 200 feet or lower, depending on, are all over the United States and all over the world, actually. And so there's nothing illegal. I don't want to think that these pilots are doing anything unauthorized or illegal, because they're not. They're authorized, and they're all over the country.
And they're very talented and trained very well to be able to do this.
Yeah, the reason we see this one is it's one of two places in the world, as I understand, where there's an observation area where you can look at airplanes below you that are underneath you. The other one is in England, up in the northwest corner of England. I forget what it's called now. Reds, I think. I can't remember. You can look it up. There's only seems to be two. And the reason this one is popular, it was constructed for the Star Wars movie, where there's and it's 100 miles from nowhere to get to this thing, and you drive down some road, and then they have this observation area. So that's the only reason you're seeing these things, but they're occurring all over the United States in generally low areas of low populated areas, of course,
right?
So that you don't bother anybody. But yeah, there's nothing illegal or unauthorized in what they were doing. I just didn't want people to think it was people. They're not playing around,
right?
I will admit that it is fun, but it's not you're not playing around, because as Ben mentioned, you make one mistake, like unfortunately that F-18 did a year and a half ago, and you're done. So it's not a game, but it is fun. It's challenging. Challenging, it might be a better word.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thanks.
And Larry said these are normally in military operating areas, not all of them, and they're published routes. And you have parameters that you can go outside of the route. In fact, some of them are designated slow routes, which we flew in the 130s because we were flying a lot lower airspeed, say, than the F-4s or the A-10s or other aircraft. But all the environmental impact studies have been done, all those things. So it's all permissible within the parameters that you fly the aircraft.
I want to thank both Ben and Larry for joining us for this special episode of the Scuttlebutt. If you liked this video, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell so that you are the first to know whenever we release our episodes every Monday. Thank you both again, and hope to see you guys on a future episode of the Scuttlebutt.
We will do anything you want, Sean, and you want to talk about airplanes, Ben and I can talk about it a week at a time.
That's it.
Well,
thank you. It's an honor to do it.
But thank you, Sean.
I don't know what I have to sell to get a co-pilot seat in an F-18 just to go up in one, but that's on my bucket list someday.
It would, even your newborn child probably wouldn't be enough.
Oh, darn.
But good luck.
I'll have another then. Thank you, guys.